morning. My name is Marja Naini from Garvan Institute, and it's my pleasure to introduce next speaker. Professor Rob Ramsay is the group leader of the gastrointestinal program at Peter Mac Cancer Center. He's a current member of the AGITG Lower GI Working Party and has led the ASM Translational Research Committee since 2018. And he's going to talk about you cannot research well what you can't see. Please welcome Rob.
Good morning. I'd like to begin my presentation by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which the research I'm going to discuss today occurred, and that's the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nation, that own the land in Melbourne where Peter MacCallum does its work. So my purpose today is to give you my personal experience and my lab's experience about what it is for a lab person to engage in the multidisciplinary team. So I've got a few messages and thoughts that hopefully my research colleagues will take, and also understand how much we appreciate our clinical colleagues welcoming us into the MDM. So I'm going to talk about why they're important. I want to actually challenge a little bit about the definition of what an MDM is. I want to appreciate the membership and how to be inclusive actually creates mutual benefits. And I want to show you how it's helped my team and why I am such an enthusiast for this sort of concept. So multidisciplinary teams have been around a long time, although I do occasionally hear that they're not particularly well run and they're often not very inclusive, and there's basically a bit of a sausage machine approach. But in big centres, and the one that I work in, I'm very grateful to see the management and care of patients that run through our system. Certainly the expectation that MDMs are conducted to manage our patients is embedded in the National Health System in the UK, and it's expected and indeed mandated. And it's the rules that have been used to run the meetings have been in place for some time, but of course they have to evolve. Now, I wanted to actually just deal with a definition. Multidisciplinary is the sort of the beginning of the term, but I've noticed, and I think it's important to consider, that membership within the teams allows people to have their say, but people do stay in their lanes. And the craft groups, as I hear them described in the MDM, tend not to speak much into the other domains. And I think that is interesting as a lab researcher, where I actually don't belong to any of them, but I'm keen to understand how each of them works and perhaps what, as a researcher, we might be able to offer. And I far prefer the concept of interdisciplinary, where there's interactions and preparedness to actually enter into other people's lanes, because I think there's an opportunity for improvement. My first discovery of the MDM was some time ago, actually. It's about 15 years ago, when I was invited in to actually observe, and I was quite taken aback about how many people are involved and how it works. And I came to respect and appreciate the skill sets that the MDM brings to bear upon understanding the journey of a patient. And I'm particularly excited by the opportunities that PET offers, which I hadn't really been exposed to in the lab because we didn't have a PET. I also appreciate the way the journey is managed. So I was very welcomed into the MDM, and a little example, a small one perhaps to you, but to me, being named on the documentation said that I was welcome, but I had to own the decision, and I actually had to pay attention to it. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of my experiences and why those have actually transformed the research I used to do into what I do now. What it did, it allowed me to understand the patient journey. Now, of course, how they enter the system is very important, because the earlier they enter it, often the better the outcome. I also discovered aspects of disease that, as a lab researcher who was completely, I thought, on top of the literature, became aware of other areas of unmet clinical need that had opportunities for research to be conducted on. And one great example was peritoneal metastasis, which had zero attention in my lab, but now actually has a large amount of research activity in that space. The other thing that you learn that you don't actually read when you're looking at the reviews is that patients come back, and that tells you lots of things, and also it says that often the patient's treatment plan has failed. Also, very early on, and I remember this being quite a startling observation, sometimes you see patients come in and there's a trend emerging within the population, and one of those that we noted very early on was the early onset of metastatic colorectal cancer in young patients. And now that's actually prime time in, like ASCO and the like, and there's some fantastic research in that space, but you become aware of it through the MDM process. Also, you need to learn who's looking after the patients, because if you want to do research with patient material, you need to know who actually is guiding that journey. And also you can play a role in the ethics applications and make practical and meaningful contributions. Also, it allows you to know what's coming down the pipeline as a researcher, that there's clinical trials being formed, and the earlier you get involved in those, the more you can offer, and obviously the more the trials can offer you in return. And indeed, it's got to the point now with some of the research we've been doing in the lab has led to the initiation of clinical trials, which is something I'd only dreamed about in the past. So here's a couple of examples of research trials that my lab has been very much part of, led by my clinical colleagues in various areas. Initially, I could do clinical trials. I was connected to them. But that first one in red was actually because of my research expertise. All the other activities are based upon collaborations with my clinical colleagues. And it's been extraordinarily rewarding. It's led to a lot of changes in the way I recruit and also the research we do. And actually it's been very helpful in securing research funding. The MDMs for me in the lower GI tumour stream, it's basically the traffic's directed by the surgeons, and I got to know these surgeons and they've become friends and colleagues. I just want to acknowledge Jack Mackey, who's passed away, and he was our leader early on when I joined, and he was very welcoming in, and then it was Craig Lynch, and now it's turned out to be Sandy Herriot, with whom I have a strong working relationship and I see many times in the week. My lab is welcome into the MDM. I expect everybody has good clinical practice training. We understand the ethical frameworks within which we're working, the confidence, etc. And that has allowed us to move into the operating room where we can collect samples and make it very easy for our clinical colleagues. In return, we actually appreciated something that I had not understood at all, and that is the clinicians felt excluded from the labs. Indeed, I could get into the OR, but they couldn't come into the lab to see me. So we changed the whole access construct within Peter Mac so everybody could move between the different domains, and it's essentially a seamless connection now, which I think is essential. And there's a collateral benefit. Sandy and I have published a lot of papers together, and we've had a lot of clinician PhDs, particularly surgeons, which I'm very proud of. So how to get started? I'll go through these very quickly. Back. We need to make connections to find out who treats the patients in your area of specialty, and you need to make those interactions easy. I am prepared to meet my clinical colleagues anytime, anywhere, to make it easy for them, because their schedules are far more constrained than mine, and that has worked extremely well. I think I'll go to the bottom point 6, and that is put up your hand to help in the clinical trial design early on. They're usually welcome because it's a pain writing them, but you can shape the clinical trial to ensure you get the materials you need to answer your questions, which are relevant to the MDM. I've got a few points here, as you can see. I think there's great opportunities. I would encourage all my clinical lab colleagues to go into the MDM space as quickly as possible. And the key point is number 9. You need to acknowledge your colleagues and, of course, the patients that are very generous in the way they contribute to the samples and the trial process. So thank you.